One reason is because it's the first one to come in since this idea was floated, and the other one is it's actually a local car, which is kind of cool. I always like to see stuff come here and kind of know that local history. So 1912 Brush was engineered and built by Alanson Brush, and he started making Brush automobiles in 1907 and continued on to 1913, but he worked with Ransom Olds and also Henry Leland. Olds was the engineer, obviously, of the Oldsmobile, and then the Rio after that, that's his initials, Ransom Eli Olds, and also Leland, Henry Leland, who was the originator of Cadillac. And so there's a lot of engineering crossovers in those cars. And you see that a lot. They're kind of like 60s era rock groups, where the drummer from one group will show up as the drummer to another group. And that's the way the car industry got started. It wasn't this large, independent guys, unless they happened to be very independent-minded. They all collaborated, and you'll see the same names and a lot of different stuff. But we'll focus on the Brush. The Brush's market was aimed at affordable transportation, cheap, simple, and anybody could drive, not power. But Brush had a really good handle on engineering dynamics, so there's some things in that car that are quite unusual for their time, and but they were competing, or he was competing against the Model T at that time, 1912. Model T had come out in 1909, and so they were both in 12 scratching for the same market. The Model T had not taken off like gangbusters in 1912 yet, so it could go any which way. Obviously, or semi-obviously, it's a gas-powered car. One of the reasons that I chose to set it here was because when I'm doing my spiel in here, I'm talking about steam and gas and electric, and here's a steam car, but we didn't really have a decent gas car to put in here. It would have to be a small car within the era. This electric car is 1912. This is the Prescott's a little earlier, what do we call it, 1901? 1903, so not too bad. By 1912, the battle had almost been won over gasoline, over steam, over electric. That was it. So this is a very simple one-cylinder car, and I'll take the hood off here so you can take a look. There we go. There. Kind of cute. I've got a little personal history in this car in that I'd see it every year in the 4th of July parade in Thomaston. Clyde Brown in Camden was the guy who discovered the car as a wreck, and a little handout. Did you hand those out, Kat?
I thought I emailed them and then people said they didn't get them.
I didn't get it.
Okay, so we'll do it again.
We'll email it later.
When you say that it was like an affordable comparison to the Model T, but like competing, how much would one of these approximate?
Okay. A Model T in 1912 would have been a little under $1,000, 900, 800, somewhere around there. Okay, that gets into kind of the genealogy of this car. This particular car was $300. You could buy this at $300, which was amazingly inexpensive at the time. Brush basically made two cars, there were three. He made a runabout, which had fenders that come together in the middle, a little bit fancier. And then he made a delivery wagon, same chassis, delivery wagon. And then he made this, which was called the Liberty. It's a Liberty Brush. And it was $300, but And this is very typical of cars of this era. It would not come with the headlights, the cowl lamps, the windshield, or the top. If you wanted those, you paid extra for those. Some didn't even come with fenders. Our Sears Auto Buggy, you buy $650. Didn't even come with the fenders. You had to buy those. You had to buy those extra. So between 1907 and 13, Brush built thousands of these, just like the curved dash Oldsmobile. The Model T really did not have the corner on the market of mass production.
Was he mass producing or was he producing these individually?
Well, it depends. You know, mass production could be done individually too. It's just how many do you make? You know, if you only make 10 cars, you're not mass producing them. So thousands would be considered mass production back in the day. Assembly line, I doubt if the Brush was made on assembly line. I doubt it. You know, that,
How was he able to sell so cheap compared to the Model T?
that I don't know. One thing is that this is a good question. One thing is the frame is wood. It's not metal.
Really?
Yeah, and Ford was using vanadium steel, which was a metal that was just basically discovered in the United States. It was made by Krupp in Germany, okay, and it's very, very strong, about 4 times as strong as the metals we were using,
Okay.
and also very pliable. You could twist it without it breaking, and that was great on early American roads, vanadium steel. Yep.
How did they distribute and sell these cars? Was it from magazines and catalogs, or was it from like a gas station?
Okay, here's where the Model T took off and cars like Brush didn't. You could have dealers, but there weren't many. They're called auto agents. But one of the Model T's fame-building things was Henry Ford just didn't focus on cars. He focused on his distribution and dealership. Okay, he made, you know, you could find a Ford dealership after a while, not necessarily in 1912, but that was his big push, was the distribution of cars. I don't think Brush had it that much. What you would do is buy it out of a catalog. If there wasn't a Brush dealer within, you know, driving distance, and it would come to your railroad yard. Every town had a railroad yard, and you'd take it out and assemble what needed to be assembled, and teach yourself how to drive it out of the owner's manual, and there you go.
Where were they manufactured? Where were they manufactured?
They were manufactured in Highland Park, Detroit. Yeah, the Brushes were. A lot of them were, again, like rock stars, all went to San Francisco or Los Angeles. Car manufacturers went to Highland Park, Detroit, and Lansing, Michigan. Yeah. So anyway, it's a one-cylinder car, very easy to drive. It cranks backwards, which is kind of neat. Every other car you come across cranks in a clockwise motion, but being a one-cylinder car, they really vibrate. And so this is one of Brush's claims to fame. He had a counterweight on the engine that spins, the engine turns backwards, and one thing counteracts the other. And you can really tell that when you drive the car. So anyway, I started to say that this car was found by Clyde Brown in Camden. It had been used, according to the little write-up you're going to get, it was used by a fellow I didn't know, but they broke the car in half because it's a wood frame. And I've seen pictures of it sitting in a field like this. Clyde Brown did a really nice restoration on it and took it to some shows. He was here once or twice in the early days. And then he passed on. The car went to Bryant Stove Works up in Thorndike, Maine, and it sat up there not running the whole time it was at Thorndike, at Bryant Stove Works. And then Mr. Bryant passed away, and his daughter sold off the collection, auctioned it off. And this fellow, now that I'm still trying to learn his name, you have it on your paper.
Mike Diodati.
Okay. Diodati? Diodati, okay. I'm trying to remember that. It's a hard one to remember, Diodati. Okay, he owns it now. Bought it out of the Bryant Stove Works auction. So, and he's been picking up cars. He also bought the Stutz that was here in our auction, 1917 Stutz. And he has, I don't know, 6 or 7 other cars. It sounds like he's building a collection of antique cars. So I think Rob, either he contacted Rob or Rob contacted him about having this car here on loan, and he agreed to put it on loan for 3 years. We got it. It didn't look like it had run for a while, although Mr. Diodati had said that they did have it running. But it took us a little bit to get it going, and it leaked water everywhere, and I see it still is, but not nearly as much as it was yesterday. And it's a cute little car to drive, very simple. You've got, like the Model T, you've got a spark advance and a throttle up underneath the steering wheel. One pedal is on the floor, that's the brakes. And then there's a lever here where you have low speed, high speed, and reverse. That's it. And this tank here is called a carbide generator. You put carbide crystals, which just look like rocks, in a basket down here. You put water in this tank, open up a valve, water drips on the carbide crystals, it effervesces and makes acetylene gas. That's a question I get hit with a lot out on the collection. What are these tanks? It's called a carbide generator. So the gas goes out of it and is piped up to the headlights. They're missing the pipes. And then there's a little burner in there and the reflector in the back, and they do throw out quite a bit of light. Most everybody knows what the bulb horn is. And what else?
Where do you get those crystals if you were running now? Where do you?
That's a problem.
Oh.
My Model T has gas lights, and I searched everywhere, and I finally found a guy that had 2 cans of 1915 carbide crystals. And out of the 2 cans, I got like 1 can worth because they had deteriorated since 1915. But it's fairly dangerous stuff, and it's very volatile. Put it in steel and it'll eat through the steel in no time at all. So Henry Ford was done with carbide lights in 1914. And I would imagine if the brushes had continued, they'd be done with them about that time too. The little seat on the back is commonly referred to as a mother-in-law seat. Yeah.
How did that one cylinder stand up against the 4-cylinder power-wise for the market? Did they just not?
1/4 of the power.
I was going to say, in hilly areas like this and so forth, I would imagine they just weren't a practical car.
No, although there was for the brush, he ran this advertising campaign of a brush climbing up the Capitol building steps. But obviously in first gear. He was that, and they also a brush climbed Pikes Peak, which is pretty good. I'm sure it took him a long time to do it.
So top speed like 35,
25.
25 on that.
25-ish. Anything over that and wishful thinking. Yeah, it's all the car can do for power. It's 10 horsepower. It's all the car can do to get into second gear and huff along on level ground. But luckily first gear is high enough where you can actually make progress, which means go faster than a walk. They weren't fast, but they were reliable. Very reliable and light. They were a good car. Brush was a good car, especially if you could pick one up for $300. Yeah.
One of the things that struck me about this car is the suspension on it. And is that part of the cost reduction so that there's not steel leaf springs, or what would, I mean, there's very few other floating, hanging suspensions like that are.
I think, this is my opinion, I think that what you're seeing is one of Brush's engineering things that he was really interested in. It probably costs more to build this, suspension-wise, than a Model T Ford. The parts in it are more complicated. One of the advances that he has, I don't know if you can see it, you can come over, it actually has shock absorbers. Nobody back then had shock absorbers. They're friction discs.
What's a shock absorber do?
Keeps the wheels from bouncing. You go over a bump or over into a pothole, and instead of the tire doing this a couple of more times, it dampens that.
How does that?
On this one, it's two plates with a pad in the middle, friction, and you can tighten the friction down. The spring action you can tighten down. Another cool thing about the suspension on this, so we should have had this car here when we were doing the suspension for the school kids. This car hangs from the springs. It doesn't sit on the springs. This rod here, okay, is this rod here. All right, so this is hanging from, not sitting on the springs, which is pretty cool. And the axles are wood. And so the suspension-wise, it's really not ahead of its time, it's just different. And it's a dual chain drive, which on bigger cars, the Simplex, the Mercedes Simplex has dual chain drive. That was a sale feature of strong, expensive cars. And here is a Brush, inexpensive car with dual chain drive. So I think that's probably Alanson Brush's desire showing through. He may have even taken a loss for a while to get the market back. Selling a car for $800 and then going down to $300 for basically the same car. I think he was trying to grab the market back.
So did he just lose out to Ford, or did he make critical mistakes in the development?
No, he probably just lost out to Ford. If I looked into his history more, I think he ended up working with other car manufacturers. Chandler might have been one of them. Oakland or Overland, yeah, it might have been one of them. Like I say, it's like rock stars. They don't, they only fade away, but they're still there. They're still in the industry somewhere doing something. That's my guess. We'll take a deeper search, but that's kind of the answer that I would give. Just like clockwork, 15 minutes.
Great.
Thank you,
That was
Warren.
awesome.
Thanks, Warren.
Very nice.